The spring thaw had come early to the Bitterroot Valley that year, bringing with it the sweet scent of wildflowers and fresh pine needles. Caleb Matthews stood at his cabin's window, watching the morning mist rise from the valley floor like spirits awakening from their winter slumber. At 62, his weathered face bore the marks of countless days spent in these mountains, each wrinkle a story etched by sun and wind. The cabin, built by his father Robert in 1962, sat nestled against the backdrop of Montana's majestic Bitterroot Range. Its wooden walls had witnessed 3 generations of Matthews men learning the ways of the wilderness. Now, as Caleb shouldered his father's old Winchester rifle, the same one that had taught him to hunt at age 12, memories of those early morning lessons flooded back. "Remember, son," his father would say, "we're not just hunters, we're stewards of this land." Robert Matthews had been a game warden, teaching Caleb not just how to track and shoot, but to understand the delicate balance of nature. Those lessons had shaped Caleb's entire life, leading him to follow in his father's footsteps as a local wildlife officer before retiring 5 years ago. The morning air was crisp as Caleb set out, his boots crunching on the remaining patches of spring snow. He wasn't hunting for sport anymore. These days, he only took what he needed for the winter months. His wife Sarah had passed away 3 years ago, and their children had long since moved to bigger cities. The solitude of the mountains had become both his comfort and his companion. After several hours of tracking, Caleb spotted fresh deer signs and followed them to an unfamiliar clearing. The sun had climbed high, and his stomach reminded him it was time for lunch. As he settled against a fallen log, unwrapping the sandwich he'd packed, movement caught his eye. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a wolf. Her coat was a mix of gray and silver, her eyes a striking amber that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. But what struck Caleb most was her demeanor. There was no aggression, no fear, just a quiet assessment that reminded him of his father's thoughtful gaze. Years of experience had taught Caleb to read animals, and what he saw concerned him. The wolf's right hind leg bore an angry wound, likely from a poacher's bullet. The infection was visible even from this distance, the fur matted and dark. Her swollen teats told another story. Somewhere, pups depended on her survival. "Easy there, girl," Caleb murmured, slowly lowering his rifle. "I won't hurt you." The wolf's ears twitched at his voice, but she held her ground. Their eyes met in a moment of understanding that transcended the natural boundary between wild and tame. Then, to Caleb's amazement, the wolf turned and limped into the forest. Before he could process what was happening, she returned, carrying a small bundle of fur in her mouth. With incredible gentleness, she placed the pup at his feet. The tiny wolf couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, its eyes barely open. Again, the mother disappeared, returning moments later with a second pup, equally small and vulnerable. Caleb's heart clenched as he realized what was happening. The mother wolf, in her wisdom or desperation, was making a choice that went against every natural instinct, entrusting her young to a human. She looked at him one final time, her amber eyes holding his gaze for a long moment, before turning and disappearing into the forest shadows. The drive to town was a blur of emotion and urgency. Dr. Karen Anderson, the local veterinarian and Caleb's longtime friend, was waiting at her clinic when he arrived with the pups bundled in his jacket. "Well, I'll be damned," Karen said, examining the tiny wolves. "They're about 3 weeks old, both females." She looked up at Caleb with concern. "You know raising wolves is complicated, right? Not to mention the legal issues." Caleb nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I still have contacts at Fish and Wildlife. I'll get the permits, do whatever it takes. Their mother chose me, Karen. I can't let her down." The next few weeks were a crash course in wolf pup care. Karen helped him set up a feeding schedule with special formula, and his spare room became a nursery. He named the pups Luna and Bramble, Luna for her silvery coat that matched her mother's, and Bramble for her darker, more mottled fur. Word spread quickly in the small town of Hamilton. Some neighbors were concerned, but most rallied around Caleb's cause. Mary Thompson, who ran the local diner, saved meat scraps for the growing pups. Old Pete from the hardware store helped Caleb build a secure outdoor enclosure. Even Sheriff Jim Baker, initially skeptical, became a regular visitor, watching in amazement as the pups grew. The wolves thrived under Caleb's care, their personalities emerging day by day. Luna was the thoughtful one, watching and learning before acting. Bramble was more adventurous, always the first to explore new things. They reminded him of his own daughters at that age. Sarah would have loved seeing him with these new girls to raise. As the pups grew, so did the pressure to give them up. The Mountain Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary offered a substantial sum to take them, arguing they could provide better care. But Caleb couldn't shake the memory of those amber eyes, that final look of trust from their mother. "They're not meant for captivity," he explained to Karen one evening as they watched the adolescent wolves play in their enclosure. "Their mother was wild, and that's what they need to be too." When Luna and Bramble reached their first birthday, Caleb knew it was time. He'd been preparing them for months, gradually increasing their territory, teaching them to hunt in the wild. The morning of their release, he led them deep into the forest, to the same clearing where he'd first met their mother. "Go on," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Be free." The wolves hesitated, looking back at him one last time before loping into the forest together. Caleb stood there for a long time, remembering another wolf's goodbye in this same spot. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. Caleb continued his solitary walks in the forest, occasionally finding signs of his wolves, tracks in the snow, distant howls in the night. 2 years passed, and though he missed them, he knew he'd made the right choice. Then came the morning that changed everything. Caleb was hiking near Thompson Creek when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a grizzly bear. Before he could react, the massive animal charged from the underbrush barely 20 yards away. Caleb ran, knowing it was futile but driven by instinct. He could hear the bear's heavy breathing getting closer, feel the thunder of its footfalls. Just as he was certain these would be his final moments, 2 gray shapes exploded from the forest. Luna and Bramble, now fully grown, moved with incredible coordination, one distracting the bear while the other snapped at its flanks. The sisters worked together with a precision that spoke of countless hunts, gradually driving the larger predator back until it finally turned and fled. In the sudden silence that followed, Caleb found himself face to face with his wolves again. They approached slowly, and he saw in their eyes the same intelligence, the same connection he'd seen in their mother's gaze years ago. Luna gently pressed her nose against his hand, while Bramble gave a soft whine that seemed to ask if he was all right. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone, melting back into their forest home. Caleb stood there, tears running down his cheeks, overwhelmed by the proof of a bond that transcended the boundaries between wild and tame. That evening, sitting on his cabin porch, Caleb wrote in his journal about the experience. As the sun set behind the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he heard a wolf's howl echo across the valley. Another voice joined it, the 2 songs twining together in perfect harmony. Caleb smiled, remembering his father's words about being a steward of the land. Sometimes he realized stewardship meant simply being present when nature extended its trust. The mother wolf had known something he'd needed years to learn, that the truest bonds aren't formed by ownership or obligation, but by the simple act of caring when it matters most. Now, on quiet nights when the moon is full, Caleb still hears those familiar howls. They remind him that some connections, once formed, never truly break. They simply evolve, like the seasons, like the forest itself, into something wild and beautiful and free.